Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to have a quick check-in here tonight. Not going to be a huge live stream. That's okay. I'll be on for a good hour or so. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So here's the story. I scheduled this live stream, and then I realized that we have a planning meeting for the upcoming Vermont retreat that starts at 10 p.m. Eastern. And so I thought, I could cancel this live stream or something, but I thought, no, I'll just do a quick check-in. I'll probably be back tomorrow night, and do a full, 2-3 hour big long thing. But for tonight, I'm just going to go for about an hour. I'm going to do an hour live stream, chat with all of you, and I can still answer super chat questions, but I'll keep my opening remarks short and I'll try to answer questions quickly. I got to be off by 10. This will just be an hour check-in. But it's a good thing to do, a good time to be in touch with the community. So yeah, we're having our Vermont retreat, and we're having a Zoom meeting with some of the people that are facilitating that. I gotta get off of here and get on that in an hour. So that's where I'm at. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. If you got a super chat or a Rumble rant you would like me to reply to, send it, and I will make a point of answering those in the second half of our show. I'm going to keep my opening remarks tonight limited because of the time constraints that we're under. But I'm glad I'm checking in, and I'm glad you all are here. Right? I'm really glad that you all are checking in with me. A lot of great things are happening in the world despite the bad things that are happening in the world, right? A lot of really, really awful things are obviously taking place, but there is a ray of hope. I'll be keeping an eye out for your super chats. I will probably start the roll call around 9:30. And then I'll answer super chats for a half hour after that. So if you've got something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show here, it's a short abbreviated show, but please send in your questions. Always happy to answer people's questions. So we're just going to, do a short abbreviated stream tonight because of a previously scheduled meeting that I need to get on. So thank you all for being here with me. So the main story that I obviously want to talk about in my opening remarks for tonight is obviously something we should all be concerned about, which is drone attacks by Ukraine against the Zaporozhye nuclear power facility. Not the first time that the Ukrainian government has attacked it. This is a nuclear facility that is in the new republics in the area of Russia, the new republics that were previously part of Ukraine that voted to join with Russia. And the Ukrainian government attacks it. And then, they refuse to admit that they did it. And we still have Western leaders trying to pretend that Ukraine is not doing this. Now, the results of potential fallout from attacking a nuclear power plant are obviously massive. When people talk about dirty bombs, when people talk about radiation, you don't mess with a nuclear facility. And there has been endless efforts by the Ukrainian military to try and target this nuclear facility. This isn't the first time they've done it. They've done it over and over and over again. What blows my mind is how Western media tries to say that Russia would attack their own power plant to spread radiation to kill their own people and their own military, which, I mean, it's just like they try to say that Russia destroyed their own natural gas pipeline. Why would they have blown up the Nord Stream 2? Russia's been fighting for years to build that Nord Stream 2 pipeline, to pump gas into Europe, to sell natural gas to Europe and make money from it. The USA threatens to blow up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and then we're told out of nowhere, after the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is blown up, they then tell us, oh, Russia did it. Russia blew up their own pipeline to prevent themselves from selling their natural gas and making profits. Why would they do such a thing? Because they're bad. That's why they're bad. Them Russians are bad, and they do bad stuff like blow up pipelines and cut into their own money. That doesn't make any sense, right? And so now we're told that Russia, tries to blow up their own. No, they don't, right? Russia's been protecting that power plant. Ukraine very clearly sent the drones to attack this power plant. And that is a very, very dangerous thing. We know that the Ukrainian government does not consider the people who live in that region to be good people. They consider the people that live in Donbass, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Lugansk People's Republic, and Odessa, it considers them to be Russians, and it hates them on an ethnic level. So they would have no qualms killing folks there with nuclear radiation. Russia, on the other hand, would not benefit from having the area where all their soldiers are, the area where their new republic is, hit with radiation. So why in the world would Russia attack their own power plant? But that is what Western media expects us to believe. I mean, it's beyond me, and it's frustrating. But at the same time, there's an element of like, the emperor has no clothes. And, in my book, the Where is America Going book, I referenced the writings of William S. Lind. William S. Lind is a Pentagon strategist who coined the concept of fourth generation warfare, FGW, fourth generation warfare. And I studied some of his writings, and I quoted them in my book, Where is America Going? And I want to refer to William S. Lind, because what's very interesting about William S. Lind is that he writes about this concept of fourth generation warfare. Basically, he argues that in the age of nuclear weapons, from the end of World War II onward, a direct confrontation between major states was too dangerous. China and the United States can't fight each other because that would involve nukes and then we all die. Russia and the United States can't fight each other because that would involve nukes and we all die. Britain and China can't go to war because that would involve nukes and we would all die. And so in the age of fourth generation warfare, war is waged primarily by non-state actors rather than states. And increasingly, people around the world are loyal not to their state, their government, their country, but rather to a non-state actor, right? When people talk to, like a very prominent example of a non-state actor is Hezbollah in Lebanon, or various revolutionary movements or religious movements or political groupings that exist around the world. People tend to be loyal to non-state actors, movements, religious groups, political groups, rather than to governments. And war is carried out by non-state actors rather than by governments. And that is what defines fourth generation warfare. Now, William S. Lind also talks about how the Vietnam War is a model for how to lose a fourth generation war. Because he talks about David and Goliath. In the story of David and Goliath, it's been told for 4,000 years. How many people have read the story of David and Goliath and sympathized with Goliath? None. Right? Everyone sympathizes with David. Everyone sympathizes with the underdog. And that the way the Vietnamese were able to win the Vietnam War is they were very clearly the underdog. and they were fighting for their country. And they presented themselves. The global community came over to their side. The people of Vietnam came over to their side. The United States was there fighting them. It was the foreign occupier with huge guns and tanks and all kinds of weaponry fighting the peasantry that were just determined to fight for their homeland. It was largely an army of women that defeated the U.S. imperialists in Vietnam. Little known fact. Those Vietnamese women are very effective fighters, and the USA assumed that the fighters would be men, and so it rounded up men on many occasions, and it was women who did a lot of the fighting, and the US imperialists were defeated in Vietnam. And the thing about Vietnam was there was a very clear polarization in Vietnam between the US and its allies and the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. They created a very clear polarization. Which side are you on? And the powers that be were the United States, and the conditions, it was a developing country, conditions in the country were bad, so people did not like the powers that be, and there was a very clear, solid opposition camp. And after a while, not at first, but after a while, that opposition camp was victorious. And that is the strategy for how to lose in fourth generation warfare. But William S. Lind, in his writing, contrasts that with the troubles in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s, leading up to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, right? And when the IRA, Sinn Féin, surrendered, and signed the peace treaty. And you'll notice that what they did in Northern Ireland was they very much made it not a clear polarization. And how did they do this? Well, at the beginning, it started out, it was, you had Sinn Féin, and you had the Provisional Irish Republican Army, and they were the clear force of opposition. And you had the British Army that was sent there as the occupier, that was viewed as the occupier. It was pretty straightforward. But then, right, over the course of the 70s and 80s, the British government changed the dynamics of the conflict. One way that they changed the dynamics of the conflict was they started funding Protestant groups that assassinated IRA fighters. Rather than having the British military be the main force that fought the IRA, they actually instead gave funding to Protestant fanatics to fight the IRA. And the British military actually received more casualties from the IRA than it inflicted on the IRA. The reason was the strategy that was put forward by Frank Kitson and others in the British low-intensity warfare. Their strategy was to make it a fight not between the British government, the occupier, the colonizer, and the population, but to rather divert it to being an ethnic confrontation between Protestants and Catholics, because no one likes hate. No one likes bigotry. So by making it so the IRA was focused on defending itself and fighting off the Protestant gangs rather than fighting the British state, that was a very effective way. And at the same time that they diverted the conflict in an ethnic direction, they also made a point of funding NGOs and liberal foundations and working with the Vatican and others to say, give peace a chance, to have Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods march for peace together, and to, and to create kind of a peace movement that framed the conflict in purely ethnic tones, religious tones. And then they had a peace movement. The other thing that was done, and this is very maniacal, is they funded ultra-leftist organizations that targeted the Provisional Irish Republican Army. And this is where it gets very weird. Trotskyite groups, there were Trotskyite groups, there were Maoist groups, there were groups that were covertly backed by the British government, that claimed to be communists and claimed to be Irish advocates of Irish national liberation, whose main function was to harass and wage an information warfare operation against the IRA. Meanwhile, the IRA itself, there were many informers inside of the IRA. There were many people that were recruited by the British government, IRA people who decided to become informers who just stayed in the IRA and passed information over to the British military. And so the IRA was riddled with informers. The IRA was constantly having to fight Protestant extremists. There was a big peace movement that was emphasizing, can't Catholics and Protestants just get along, etc. There were ultra-left elements that were attacking the IRA or sometimes carrying out bombings that would be blamed on the IRA. This is very weird, but there were a number of bombings that in the British media and et cetera are blamed on the IRA even today. But if you actually look into the fine print, the IRA didn't do them. It was one of these ultra-left groups that did them, right? And you look at the details, look over the IRA bombings and look and see that there's a number of them that were not done by the IRA, that were done by Trotskyite groups, that were done by Maoist groups, that were done by weird breakaway sects. They created a situation where very little fighting was actually going on between the British military and the IRA. Occasionally, the IRA would take out a British soldier or something like that, but they created a situation where it was so confusing. It was so confusing that eventually the IRA signed a peace treaty, and the British Empire, the prevailing power that be, remained intact. Now, that is the strategy through which anti-imperialists in the United States are right now being handled by the American government. And if you can't see it, you're a fool, right? And I'm not calling out any specific individual. But if you look at the number of people in the alternative media world right now who are pro-Russia, pro-China, anti-imperialist, we are all fighting with each other. We're all confused. Some of us get boosted sometimes. Some of us get boosted other times. Everyone is suspicious of everyone else. And there's not a clear polarization. It's not clear who's on what side. And what they really don't want is any kind of clear battle lines, any kind of clear polarization. Right? And that's why, the Rage Against the War Machine rally was so threatening, because it was almost a pretty clear polarization. It was very clear. These are the people that are against the war, and some of them are leftists and some of them are rightists, but they're all against the war. And you'll notice that there was a huge effort to smear that rally, a huge effort to make people nervous. And you'll also notice that since then, it looks like, there's been a lot of effort to make sure nothing like that rally happens again, because that rally was like a moment where for a brief second, you could see a very clear polarization. It was very clear. There were some people that were supporting that rally, and there were some people who claimed to be on this side or that side, but they weren't supporting the rally. And those of us who are genuinely anti-imperialists, we should be trying our best to frame political discourse in the United States like the Vietnam War. Which side are you on? Clear polarization. Our enemies are very much going to try to make it as confusing as possible, where no one knows who's on what side, where we're fighting this side, we're fighting that side, we're confused, and that is basically the push and pull. Those of us who want to see the United States move in an anti-imperialist direction, we need to be doing everything in our power to make a clear polarization. And those forces that are working against us, they know what they're doing. Go and read William S. Lind. Go and read Frank Kitson Gangs and Countergangs. They are trying to make it as confusing as possible. So we need to constantly be drawing lines of demarcation. I think the Uhuru case is a very great example. Are you supporting the Uhuru movement or not? Now, it's not a question of are you symbolically saying, that they shouldn't be attacked? Are you actually rallying in their support? Are you actually giving them a platform? Are you promoting them? Are you doing everything you can to raise awareness about their case or not? And I think that is a very clear polarization, because Tara Reid supports the Uhuru movement. Tucker Carlson supports the Uhuru movement. The gray zone folks, they support the Uhuru movement, right? The Center for Political Innovation, we support the Uhuru movement. The Party of Communist USA, they support the Uhuru movement. But there's a lot of people that either don't support the Uhuru movement. That's the bulk of the internet left. They just go, oh, they're a cult. I read something on the internet about Black Hammer, blah, 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 and they don't support them. Or you get people that symbolically support them. The Communist Party USA has put one article on its website, one little article on its website. Okay, it's wrong to raid them. Boop, boop, boop. They're not doing anything to help them, and they're certainly not promoting their case, and they're certainly not, sharing and promoting the Tucker Carlson interview that they did. Oh my God, they're not doing that, right? The same with the Party of Socialism and Liberation. They have made one. Okay, we support you. Yeah, the FBI shouldn't be raiding the homes of black revolutionaries, but they don't do anything for them. And in fact, they went out of their way to try and ruin their national rally that they had in Washington, D.C., and so much so that the Uhuru movement actually called them out. So the Uhuru case is one of these cases where you can very clearly see a polarization, right? And that is very important, right? And we need to look for moments like that. And we need to, and the Assange question, right? Again, there's a lot of people who really support Julian Assange. And there's a lot of people who, okay, will support Julian Assange. We don't want. And then there's a layer of people who just straight up don't support Julian Assange. And it's a good test case. And we need to find these points of polarization. And among the people that are on the right side, we need to solidify their ranks. We need to have cohesion with people that are on our side. And that's very difficult because social media is designed to highlight people's differences with each other. We need to go out of our way to create cohesion around certain issues of polarization. And we need to keep in mind that our enemies are trying to do everything they can to not create cohesion, right? They're trying to just make a situation where it's once, I've talked about this before, and this was alluded to by Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein is the spouse of Samantha Power. He is a Democratic Party strategist, a regime change advocate. He worked in the Obama White House, and he wrote a book about conspiracy theories, but he also wrote an internal document about conspiracy theories that was leaked by WikiLeaks. And if you read that internal document, one phrase that comes out of that document is cognitive infiltration, which means basically going into quote unquote conspiracy communities and discrediting them. And a lot of people don't really understand what the point of cognitive infiltration really is, right? It's not, it's like there's fake conspiracy theories that are actually conspiracies, and now you're more paranoid. That's not exactly it. The point is they want to create a light switch effect. They want to create a situation where you believe the mainstream media, or you're bonkers, or you're bonkers. And there's not a clear opposition to the mainstream media. That's what they want, right? They want to create a situation where it's not like there's two sides, right? There's not Americans who want to send weapons to Ukraine and Americans who don't. They want to create a situation where there's Americans who want to send weapons to Ukraine, which is the de facto position. That's the British Empire. And there's all kinds of crazy shit that is inconsistent, that doesn't make any sense, that one people saying one thing, one people saying another, and it's totally confusing. So if you don't want to be totally confused, you better just support the U.S. government sending weapons to Ukraine. That's what they want to do, right? And that's again, it's kind of like what they did with the IRA. You either supported the British Empire, or you were in this really, really confusing world where it wasn't clear what's what, and that's what they want to do. Right. And so they want to create a situation where you're either with them or you're in this very, very confusing, unclear universe where there's all kinds of insanity. That's what they want to do. right? And that's what cognitive infiltration is. It's about making sure that the dissident communities are divided, confused, inconsistent, at each other's throats. It's not just divide and conquer. It's scramble, basically. They don't want there to be a clear polarization. People who support sending weapons to Ukraine think this. People who don't support sending weapons to Ukraine think this. They don't want that. They don't want a clear polarization. They want their position, which is the normal thing that you should just believe. And then they want, layers of insanity, just a confusing world of insanity that makes no sense. Right. And this is how they control the narrative. Right. This is what they've learned to do. The other thing that they don't want, well, anyway, I could go on about this for a while, but this is what I want people to be aware of. That basically, if we are serious about building anti-imperialism, we need to find means of polarization, right? We need to find mechanisms of polarization, and we need to resist the efforts to fractionalize, right? And we need to build cohesive entities that can effectively carry out operations. And that is important. We need to basically find, figures in the ruling class that we can target. We need to find issues that we can, where there's some agreement between us and layers of the ruling class, and organize around those issues and prove our ability to organize around those issues. We need to build blocks that are effective and can carry out effective operations around certain issues to get certain things done, right? That needs to be the goal of those of us who are serious about anti-imperialism. And if we can do that, I think that as things in the United States continue to deteriorate, which they're doing, and we don't want things to get worse, but they're getting worse. As things in the United States continue to deteriorate, if we are building up cohesive layers that can effectively carry out operations and can prove themselves to be useful to some people in the power structure sometimes, and can get things done, right? Can actually get operations done while bonding people to each other. We can grow and survive as the storm gets closer. That is my thinking. And that's how I'm starting to see things. Right. And, we need to find a way that we can be effective, the way we can get things done, and be, on the one hand, right, you don't want to just be a talk shop, right? Because there's a lot of people in this anti-imperialist universe that are just a talk shop, right? It's just an intellectual exercise, right? We just want to learn about different things, and it's just an intellectual exercise. But then there are some people in this universe, who, on the other hand, they get so involved in things that they lose their focus. They lose, they just become surrogates of one wing of the ruling class or another, right? And we've seen that. And we don't want to lose that either. We are anti-imperialists. So the strategy, the question is, how do we make ourselves relevant? How do we intervene in the existing questions and divisions in the ruling class and divisions in society, and carry out operations that give us a reason to exist and function, while at the same time maintaining our anti-imperialism, maintaining our illiberalism, and building our own organization so we don't just become functionaries of bigger forces, right? And this is kind of what Lenin talks about in his book, What Is to Be Done, which is a very good book. I recommend reading it, even though it's very difficult to get through. It's filled with all kinds of obscure references, etc. But, right now, we're in a situation where they expect the American people not only to believe that Russia blew up its own pipeline, but now that Russia is trying to destroy its own nuclear power plant for God knows whatever reason. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is where mainstream media is at. So that's what I wanted to spend the first half of my very short remarks tonight talking about. So why don't we do the roll call, and then I will answer any super chats, and then I'm done. This is a short live stream tonight. names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ryan in Kansas City, Nate in Chicago, David in Vietnam, Bob Troy in New York, Leonid in Los Angeles. I'm just a dog under the mountains. Rice in Adelaide, Australia. Herb Bryant in Tampa, Florida. David in San Jose, California. Pane in Albuquerque. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We got Crooklyn in Brooklyn. Welcome. Gonzalo in Argentina. Denver, Colorado. Patrick in Maine. Anthony Arthur in northern British Columbia, Jonathan from North Carolina. We got Alex in Brazil. We got Briggy in Pennsylvania. We got Steve Chote in Ringgold, Georgia. We got AC from Miami. We got Patch in Arizona. We got Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner. We got Debbie in Mexico. We got Ichabod in New York City, Ichabod Crane, Ottawa, Canada. Brett from Alberta, Canada. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations, names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Jamie in Boise, Idaho. Welcome, Jamie. Good to have you with us. Good to have you with us. So I've got one. Oh, we got Noah in Boston. Shout out to you, Noah. Shout out to you. We got Anthony in Detroit. I've got one super chat here, and I've got one Rumble rant. So if anybody else has anything else they want me to talk about, again, this is going to be a very short live stream. But the super chats do help me pay my bills and make sure I can afford this, apartment in New York City where my rent is too damn high. And if you can send super chats to support the work that I do, that's great. It also gives me something to talk about here in the second half of our show. So yeah, any other questions people have, please send them in. Give me something to talk about. So now, for the remainder of our show, we got two super chats to talk about. The first one is a Rumble rant. It's from Jamie Turner. He says, what is the legacy and accomplishment of communist groups in Yugoslavia, from Yugoslavia? When you say from Yugoslavia, we got Lee Stranahan out in Sioux Falls, from Yugoslavia. It's interesting because there were many, in the history of the American Communist Party, there were many, many different. Thank you. Thank you very much. There were many, many different communist groups of Yugoslavian origin that merged into the Communist Party USA. The foreign language federations of the Socialist Party of America. There was a Slovenian one. There was, there was a Croatian one. And there were many, many of those, right? Many people fled from what became Yugoslavia to come to the United States and had a foreign language federation and eventually merged into the Communist Party USA. We also know that, the Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia was created because Tito, who was a communist in Yugoslavia, he led a guerrilla insurgency against the Nazis, fought against the Nazis in the Second World War, and created the Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia. It's very awesome. And they did great stuff, and they lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and they held together many different ethnic groups. There's a very good book that on Yugoslavia called To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. And it is really the book that I have learned the most about that. I got the book here somewhere. I really like To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. It's a very, very good book on the topic of Yugoslavia. It's very important, very important. So I would recommend that. Also, I am someone who has studied the fight between Albania and Yugoslavia, right? Because Albania originally, Stalin wanted Albania to be part of the Socialist Federation of Yugoslavia, and Enver Hoxha maintained that Albanians are not Slavs, and his book With Stalin, which is interesting. It's about the 4 meetings that Enver Hoxha had with Stalin. It's mainly dedicated to Enver Hoxha making the case that Albania should not be part of Yugoslavia. The other thing is in 1948, Yugoslavia cut ties with the Soviet Union, and it became an anti-communist or anti-U.S. imperialism aligned country. And during the Korean War, it supported South Korea against North Korea, and they got foreign investment in exchange for that, right? And then they had adopted a more mixed economic model. And actually, I think that their mixed economic model was smart. It was kind of ahead of their time. They had different foreign investments, but it may have helped eventually plant the seeds of Yugoslavia being torn apart. But 1948 was the year that Yugoslavia cut ties with the Soviet Union. And one of the worst things about Khrushchev was that Khrushchev was very hostile to Albania. But immediately after the secret speech, he begged Yugoslavia to become friends with the Soviet Union once again. And that was one of the main grievances that Albania had against Khrushchev and against the Soviet Union was, while Khrushchev cut relations with Albania, was vicious to Albania, he was constantly trying to get Yugoslavia, which was very much a country that had aligned with the United States. It was trying to get them back on their side. And so there was a feeling that the Soviet Union was tailing after the traitors in Yugoslavia and, mistreating the genuine anti-revisionist leadership of Albania. So that's important to keep aware of as well. And that a lot of the criticism of Yugoslavia that was published by Albania in the 1950s, preceding the Sino-Soviet split, was actually a coded critique of the Soviet Union. That they were using Yugoslavia as kind of the negative poster boy, but a lot of what they were saying, especially after Stalin died, was actually aimed at the Soviet Union, right? And that's important to keep in mind as well. If you read Tito's writings, he presented factory autonomy and what he called worker self-management as being very revolutionary. It was, in a way, a retreat from a centrally planned economy. However, in a way, it was pioneering. He was kind of ahead of his time in terms of what Deng Xiaoping was doing. I don't think that there's something inherently wrong with having a mixed economy or having factory autonomy. And that nowadays, especially in the service sector and in terms of consumer goods, that stuff is very important. That's what I would maintain. So that's to answer the question from Jamie Turner. So now we've got some super chats. Why is Cuba accused of being a state sponsor of terrorism? Because they supported guerrilla movements in South America. Haven't seen any evidence of Cuban-backed guerrillas here in Argentina. Well, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, even up into the 80s, there were a lot of military dictatorships in Latin America where you couldn't organize peacefully. And I wrote an important article on this very question for Mint Press. And I will link the article. When Cuba was delisted as a state sponsor of terrorism, I wrote an article about how their foreign policy has not changed. The world has changed, right? Because now Cuba mainly supports communists and socialists around Latin America that want to take a peaceful road to socialism. But in the 70s and 80s, Cuba was largely supporting people who advocated armed struggle. And you can read my article for Mint Press. It's one of my better articles. And I basically pointed out in that article that what has changed is you don't have brutal military dictatorships, and it's possible to peacefully organize. In Pinochet's Chile, you could not peacefully organize. In Somoza's Nicaragua, you could not peacefully organize. So countries were forced to take up the gun. And the USA, of course, accused the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, the FARC of Colombia, these various groups, of being terrorists. They were not terrorists. They were peasants fighting for their rights. They were indigenous people trying to not get thrown off their land. They were socialist movements that originated largely in the countryside, in the mountains, that were fighting for people's rights, and they couldn't organize peacefully. They couldn't organize legally, and so they were forced to do that. And what changed is that, the United States started removing these military dictatorships because they were too expensive, right? And with George Soros and the Open Society Institute in the 80s, the USA started removing, military juntas and having these countries have quote unquote democratic governments, because military juntas need to industrialize and they need to hand out the goods in order to stay in power. And as these countries, were, there was less of a threat from the Soviet Union. The USA didn't feel like allowing them to industrialize, and it's much easier to implement austerity and neoliberal economics in the context. And thank you, Herb Bryant, in the context of a neoliberal free market society. And so because of that, right, it was suddenly possible to peacefully organize, and so Bolivarianism emerged, and that Cuba cut its ties with the FARC in Colombia. But this is very important. In the early 90s, when Colombia was no longer a military dictatorship, when they were having free elections, the Communist Party of Colombia voted to end armed struggle. And the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces, then cut its ties with the Communist Party because they wanted to continue waging an armed struggle. And at that point, Fidel Castro denounced the FARC, and Cuba stopped arming them because they said it was not necessary. And he said that armed struggle should not become a way of life, right? And that what happens is if an insurgency continues for decades, it degenerates into criminality. And that's what's happened. The Naxals in India are criminals. They're not revolutionaries. They're not going to take power anytime soon. Yes, maybe in the 60s when they first started, it was a genuinely revolutionary movement, but they've been illegal for so long and they have had so little gains, they basically just become a form of criminality in a certain region of India, right? And the same for the FARC. The FARC started out as a genuinely revolutionary movement, but it deteriorated over the course of decades into a form of criminality. Thank you, Clifford. I do appreciate that. And at this point, most of the FARC did sign the peace treaty. There's a couple dissident FARC that didn't. But at this point, Fidel Castro in Cuba, they saw that when armed struggle was no longer a necessity in Colombia, they shouldn't have kept doing it, right? So Cuba does not support armed groups at this point. They're not handing out guns to anybody. But they were in the 70s and 80s, but that's because the conditions were there. Communists prefer a peaceful transition to socialism. They do. They prefer a peaceful transition. But when the road of a peaceful transition is cut off, people have to defend themselves, etc. But that's what I wrote in my article in Mint Press. Cuba is not a state sponsor of terrorism. And I believe Trump put them back on the list. Obama delisted them as a state sponsor of terrorism. Trump put them back on as a favor to the Miami crowd. At the end of the day, state sponsor of terrorism is just a label that it's a form of sanctions that the American government can put on a country. That's really all it is. All right. Great show. Hey, thanks. I'm glad you like it. Thanks for stopping by. And thanks again. I'm doing the best I can. Have you had a chance to read Jyoti Burra's new pamphlet on identity politics? If so, what do you think? I have a new copy of it. Jyoti gave me a copy at the gathering that happened that I was at with the U.S. Friends of the Soviet People on Friday. I have looked through different sections of it. What's interesting is it seems like a lot of what she's saying should just be common sense. Anyone who knows anything about Marxism, it should just be common sense. But it's not. Right. And she's basically talking about how all these other ideologies that are not Marxism have come to dominate Marxist spaces. I read a couple different sections of it. I like what I'm reading. Not exactly my view. It's more of the classic ML view. Whereas ML is the foundation, but I like Bolivarianism. I like Baathism. I like the Shia revolutionary movement. I'm much more eclectic ideologically these days. But I think Jyoti is really the best voice for articulating the standard Marxist-Leninist understanding of history. And that's really a great achievement on the part of the CPGBML, is that they have, just continued to represent and stand for genuine Marxism-Leninism when all these other groups have just become part of wokeism. So there you go. The Supreme Court of Brazil ordered an investigation of Elon Musk for misinformation. Naturally, he complained and claimed that Brazil was cracking down on free speech. Ironic, since he has banned some pro-Palestinian accounts. There's fights in the ruling class. That's very clear. Brazil's current leadership is in the camp of the pro-woke crowd. But there are anti-imperialists within Brazil's ruling coalition also. I mean, and I met them, right? There are people in Lula's party, there are people in the Communist Party of Brazil that are genuine revolutionaries. It's complicated. In Brazil, it's more complicated because you do have genuine anti-imperialists, but, there is like the liberal bourgeoisie that is aligned with Biden, but there's also, and then you have this hard right, which is, like Malay or like, is pro-Zionist, and it's complicated. Brazil is a complicated political situation. Right. And I feel like there was a lot of good developments in South and Central America in the early part of the 21st century, but that's going to slow down, I predict, because at this point, the USA and the imperialists have revamped their strategy. Now there is a genuine synthetic left in Latin America. There didn't used to be. There used to be in Latin America. The USA was backing the hard right anti-communists who were racist, who were from the old military juntas. That's who the USA was backing. And so the indigenous folks and the bulk of the population and everybody who wasn't part of the hard right was able to kind of align themselves. That's where Bolivarianism came from. Since the Obama years, the USA has revamped its strategy. So now there is an actual synthetic left in Latin America, and that confuses things. And that it's going to be very difficult. Something like Rage Against the War Machine could never happen in Chile. Why? Because, hey, it might be awkward for me to, go to an event where there's Republican members of Congress, but we haven't killed each other, right? In Latin America, there is a body count between the hard right and the genuine anti-imperialist left. There's a body count. There are thousands and thousands of dead bodies there. So it's not something like Rage Against the War Machine, which ultimately needs to happen, right? We need an anti-monopoly coalition. The lower levels of capital that tend to be the hard right and the anti-imperialist working class need to have a block against the imperialist monopolies. That's what needs to happen. And that, I believe, is the direction the United States is moving in, an anti-monopoly coalition. However, in Latin America, that's going to be very hard to happen because the genuine anti-imperialist communists and the hard right lower levels of capital have killed each other. And there's a body count. It's going to be very hard. And it's hard here in the United States. The old communist groups, they will not form an anti-monopoly coalition. They're not going to be part of Rage Against the War Machine because they have it in their head Republicans are just evil. And that's because Republicans have beaten them up, right? I mean, they tell me, older communists I knew would talk about how during the Vietnam War days, if you had an anti-war rally, random people who were conservative would come up and punch you. And, that was just what it was like to be an activist in the United States during those years, and that it's very hard, right, for genuine, genuine anti-imperialists to, it's confusing, right? So, in Latin America, it's going to be very difficult. I do think, though, that because in the United States, the genuine anti-imperialist left has always been very weak and small. And because the synthetic left is so widely hated, I feel like there is the potential for a real anti-monopoly coalition in the United States. So there we go. All righty. Thank you, Herb. I'm the best. Hey, I agree. I'm the best at absolutely everything. So there we go. I'm just joking, but I do appreciate it, though, Clifford. Thank you. Is it possible for Russia to announce the decommission of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, removing as much nuclear material away as possible? I don't know. I don't know the specifics, honestly. I really don't know the specifics about it. So I am waiting to see what is said at the UN Security Council. I know Russia is going to address the issue at the UN Security Council, and I'll be covering that meeting. So I'll be listening attentively to what Russia says. I do believe in nuclear power. And I do believe that the people of the Donbass have the right to have electricity. So, the idea that they should just get rid of this nuclear power plant, maybe that's what Russia wants to do. And if they want to do that, I support their right to do it. But, it doesn't sound like something that should happen. It should just be that Ukraine doesn't attack it. How about that? And why should Russia give up the right of people in a war-torn region to have electrification? Right? That seems like that would be a victory for Ukraine if they were able to accomplish that militarily, right? I think the people of the Donbass have the right to electricity, but maybe Russia thinks that's the best move. I support Russia's right to make the best battlefield decisions under those circumstances. All right, folks. Well, I am going to end this stream now because I have a planning meeting for Vermont that starts pretty soon. But it was a great stream. It was a quick stream. I'm glad I did it anyway, even though I have to get on the planning meeting for Vermont. So I hope that those of you who like anti-imperialism and like our politics, I hope you'll register for the Vermont retreat. It's coming up. And yeah, all my best. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.